make some noise and give it up for J-Town, Jeffersontown!
Welcome to the Umbrella of No Judgement, a podcast brought to you by Open Mind.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast, Umbrella of No Judgement, Competition Edition. I'm Layla.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Haven.
I'm Magdala.
I'm Zach.
I'm Miguel.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Maureen.
And this week's episode is going to be on how we created a safe space for youth to talk about mental health and remove the stigma around it.
The first thing we did was get information from the people we were helping, in that case, the youth. We created a survey for every student in our school and asked how they felt about the topic of mental health awareness, and not only in our school, but also how they talked about it in their homes. Out of the 235 surveys we got back, 30% of them said that they only have 1 to 3 people to talk about or talk to if something is bothering them. On a scale from 1 to 5, about 45.5% of the students give a score less than 3 when they are asked the question, how well do you think your school addresses mental health? About 20% of the student body surveyed that their biggest barrier for addressing their mental health is because of their race, gender, or sexuality. We use this data to create our solution.
So one of the things we decided to do to change the conversation in our student body surrounding the conversation of mental health was to post positive affirmation boards all around the school with encouraging sticky notes. So those positive affirmation boards are all around the school, and it's for anyone who's had a really rough day and they just need a dose of inspiration or motivation.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite reasons we decided to do this, because we know that sometimes people just need a reminder that eventually everything is going to be okay. A lot of times, especially as teenagers, we get in our heads and adopt a negative mindset in which we feel like the world is against us and there is no stopping it. However, we have these affirmation boards to help revive a more positive mindset in the school. We want teens to know that things do get better and that they are so much more important than the bad day that they're having.
We also decided to paint some positive affirmations within the bathrooms of our school, since we know that a lot of negativity goes on there, and sometimes there's a bad mindset when you look at yourself in the mirror. We wanted to make sure that when students go in there, they feel the positivity. We're going to continue to add to bathrooms by teaming up with the art classes at our school to do some free hand painting on the bathroom stalls, which will add to the positive environment. Many students have commented that the dash of color has improved their mood.
We are really pushing self-love and positive mentality because we know that it truly affects people's lives and the way they view the world. We hope that these positive affirmations are being seen by so many people around the school that they start believing in themselves, that they start believing that they have true significance and worth in this world. If someone tells you that you're worthless repeatedly, unfortunately, you're going to start believing it. But if someone tells you that you're valuable and beautiful, you're going to start believing that.
One of the best things about our affirmation bracelets is that students and staff can personally send a positive message to anyone in the school, and they get a bracelet that says you are enough. It's a physical reminder of how important and great they are.
Now, the biggest project that we have done so far is our podcast, The Umbrella of No Judgement, where we give students around our school and the community an opportunity to anonymously share their stories and talk about mental health. By being brave enough to share their personal experiences and stories, they let the people know that are listening that there are people going through the same thing that they are going through. On the pod, as we call it, we address issues like suicide, depression, anxiety, and panic attacks, while also discussing topics like the effects of social media, toxic relationships, and abusive households.
Now, the podcast has become very popular amongst the students at our school, so much so that there's a very high possibility of a podcast club coming up and added to the list of activities going on at our school. The podcast has created an increase in the topics of mental health in the classrooms and in the peer-to-peer conversations. Students are realizing that mental health is not limited to one group of people. And just us walking around in the hallways, we hear students talking about, oh, did you hear what happened on the podcast last night? Because they are understanding that these are students coming directly from their school. They don't know who they are, but these are students coming from their school to know that this is not, this is what's actually happening.
We worked with therapist Mike Robards and lead JSBS counselor Michelle Searcy to include people in our community that could help us expand our vision. Our plan is to create a blueprint to give to other schools in order to spread our ideas and help reduce the stigma around mental health for all students.
Jeffersontown! All right. J-Town, are you ready for your judges' questions? Yes, oh, okay. All right. Yes, we are. Judges, you got 3 minutes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the podcast? How often does it happen? When is it recorded? Can I get it on my iTunes? What's that?
Well, the podcast was, well, first, let's talk about the name, The Umbrella of No Judgment. One of our coaches was talking with her lifelong best friend, and they were at a concert, and they weren't paying attention to the concert at all. They were actually just having this really deep conversation, and they were opening the umbrella of no judgment. That's where we got the name from. So what we're doing is we use our social media, and we use just the teachers and our coaches to spread the word for anybody that has anything that they want to share or they want to talk about that's really been harping on them to come and get it out, because we've realized that when you have something weighing on you, the best way to get over it is to let it out. So that's what the podcast is for, and it's also for listeners to realize that I'm not going through this by myself. There's people going through these same things. So the people will DM us on Instagram or Twitter or come to one of our coaches or one of us, and they'll say, hey, I want to set up a pre-interview for you all. We do the pre-interview so we're not hit with anything during the podcast. It's like, whoa, we don't know how to handle that. So we do a pre-interview, we scope it out, and that we try to work with students because we know things can be different. A lot of us are in AP classes and stuff, but our teachers are super supportive of us not being in class for a second to do the podcast. So we do a pre-interview, then we either stay after school or whatever works best for the student on the podcast, which come out usually 2 or 3 times a week, and we record the podcast.
And also, as you will see in our exhibit, our podcast is on Apple Music, Spotify, SoundCloud. It's on a lot of different things because it has become very popular. And I can't really remember of the name, but I know that we've gotten mentioned in some pretty big podcasts,
The Ball and Chain podcast.
The Ball and Chain podcast to listen to ours.
I really appreciate what you all have put together here because I think you took a lot of time thinking about the end user. But what I was really curious, in your written report, you mentioned student design and led professional development for teachers around mental health, and I just kind of wondered what that was going to look like.
So we have noticed that we have these suicide prevention days during the school year, but they're kind of, teachers don't, some teachers address them as a burden. It's suicide prevention day, it's taking time out of their day to talk about this. So then we've noticed that students don't want to talk about it either if the teachers are addressing it negatively. So we thought of a student or student-led teacher kind of discussion to talk about how we think that mental health and suicide prevention and things of that nature should be addressed, because we are the ones that have to do this training. So what do we want, and what better group to do it than this one?
Especially because I know if a student sees that a teacher is taking it as a burden, it makes them feel like a burden, and they're like, well, I don't want them to feel like a burden, and that's already so much in the youth and teens now. And so we want them to know that, like, teachers do care, and sometimes teachers just don't know the way to express it, and we want to help them express it because we know they do.
One more question, judges.
What kind of feedback have you guys gotten from your fellow students and teachers on the effect the podcast has had?
So the feedback that we've gotten has actually been kind of astounding. We've heard that, like, especially in school, like we mentioned, a lot of the students have been talking about it, and they've been asking questions like, what is it? Like, a student can do a podcast? Oh my God. You know, it's so easy to do, and it's easy to get the message out because we have it on so many platforms. And especially, we actually talked, I haven't mentioned this to my group yet, but we actually talked about it in my church youth group. And we talked about how just different stories, different people, everyone's going through something different. And it's nice to learn about experiences, how you can address them and talk about them.
All right. Y'all give it up for Jeff.